This is the Late Life Archive. I'm Ty Besh. As always, it is episode 7. I'm very excited. We're almost to episode 10. What a landmark that will be for this project. Something, if you haven't heard already, I've been working on accomplishing for years. Let me take a second. It's not even the 10th episode. I'm going to do it anyways right now. I had this idea years ago. Like 2013 we're talking. It's 2020. So this is what happens with ideas when you don't have investors or you don't have the capital you need. This has been operating in the background of me having to survive financially in other ways. And although it's not making me any money yet, it's the right time to be continuing to move forward with it. And I'm really glad that here we are. On episode 7, technically the 6th person I'm talking about. And I'm really excited to be making more moves here in Arizona specifically. And I guess the 10th episode, wait for it, I'll talk about why so many of these people that I've been interviewing are from the Midwest. Anyway, today we have JR. I will be talking about JR, a wonderful man that I got to talk to. We were by the lake. He has a beautiful lake house. We got to sit in the expansion that he had on the house, big bay windows, whatever you want to call those, huge windows. You can see the lake. It was in the winter. It was kind of frozen over, but there were still ducks and swans and hawks flying around. A lot of beautiful wilderness. So I'm excited to talk about what I learned from JR, a seemingly Renaissance man as he was growing up, a salesman at heart, and also someone who has a very good heart. As always, I started with JR and his family, or when he was young. And of course, when you're talking to someone about their childhood, the family is there. And what really caught my ear, and this is the first response he had to my question of the usual, what's the first memory you can think of from as young as possible? His answer was, my family. And this is a quote, "We did great as a family." That's what he told me. And he says he remembers his family dynamic the most of when he was young, specifically because he loved his parents. They were very nice to him, he said. They were very supportive. And especially his brother, who we'll kind of get into later, was a figure in his life. And although older than JR, he was always down to play when they were young. And I love to hear that. Of course, that was more common back then, obviously because, what we talked about with Patty's episode, which is the episode 2 before this. I believe it's 5, if you want to go check that out. She grew up in an era where just go play for 12 or 13 hours a day. Go for it. Do your thing. I'll see you for dinner. And he grew up in that same kind of environment in Redford, Michigan. So I'll jump into my notes here now that we're on track. He grew up in what he told me was a wet plaster brick home. Now, I didn't do my research on this, but he said that because he was explaining that it was built very well, and to this day, it's still standing. The neighborhood he grew up in was still standing, and they still look beautiful to this day, he told me. He used to cut through with his brother a fence in the backyard in the neighborhood and sled down the golf course hills. They lived right next to, I didn't ask what golf course it was, but I can imagine just making a hole or, in the snow, and you can kind of dig down and slip through the bottom of the chain fence and enjoying the beautiful hills of a golf course. Michigan has really nice golf courses, in Metro Detroit especially. I'll have to look up what that was. I'll put those in the notes. This is the second time I'm hearing about a golf course in Michigan. Metro Detroit. Mark, which was I think episode 1 or 2, I think it was 2, he was talking about Oakland Hills golf course because his father worked there as a golf instructor. That golf course, I've seen it for myself, is incredible. So great places to sled, I will say. Quick little side note, I learned to drive a manual car when I was, maybe 13 or 14. And my father took me to Oakland Hills, and the golf course area, the campus of the university, simply to make me go up a hill. And you can imagine if you're learning to drive a manual car for the first time and you're figuring out how to stay accelerating up a hill, or as you're going backwards, how to counteract that with accelerate. Wow. I will never forget that. Anyways, enough about me. So JR had a ton of fun with his brother. He said at the golf course, especially in the winter, he would go miles away from the house the whole day and not get back until dinner. And it was no big deal. So like I mentioned, this is kind of normal, but he would do it so much so that there's a funny story that we're approaching. And it's a good example of how much this did ring true. He would stay, typically, he said, out until around 9 p.m. in the summer, because in Michigan, it doesn't get dark until around 8:30 in the summer. So he would be running around until, and then he'd have a very late dinner. So that's something to think about as well, which is interesting. He would go to school. He continued to explain this kind of stuff, like the environment he was able to live in. He would go to school with a baseball mitt, and he would come home only when him and his friends were tired of playing baseball. So they would go to the field after school, and even after a long day of school, this is the beauty of being a child, right? Being a younger person. You would have all this energy still to just go do whatever. Must be nice. So he would be doing that stuff. And then he was explaining more about the neighborhood, and this is what brought up what is normally called the white flight from Detroit. So this was also mentioned in Patty's episode. They are not the same age. I believe JR is, gosh, if I had to guess, he would be 10 years younger than Patty-ish. Maybe more. I'm assuming around 10 years younger. So, and this is why I wanted to do more research with Patty, because his family, JR's family, was a part of that white flight, what they call it, which is too bad, from Detroit. And Redford was one of the first cities that was kind of built up right next to Detroit. So from there, he mentioned, of course, everyone moved northwest, which is how you get Farmington Hills, Northville, Brighton, all that kind of stuff. But Redford was kind of the first, what he was telling me, neighborhood that was built up, where everyone was like, we got to get out of Detroit. It's about to bust. It's about to be, a very bad situation. Let's go build the suburbs. So, he mentioned that specifically because you'll see in a few seconds here why that makes sense. So he was a part of that, and he used to hunt deer when he was younger. This is skipping to high school, but he did mention it right after this. He remembers that he would hunt deer with a bow, and he was very proud because he would actually build his own bows, and he called it a recurve bow. I'm not sure what that is offhand. I will, of course, include it in the notes, whatever it is, even if it is called a recurve bow. If it's not, I'll tell you what it actually is. He would go after school to the woods in Brighton. And this is during the time when Brighton, Michigan was basically nothing. So when Patty was talking about when she was in Farmington and Northville was nothing, he's in Redford, and north of him, about 40 minutes, I would say, is also nothing in Brighton. Now, to this day, of course, Brighton, I think I mentioned as well in her episode, Brighton is bustling with people, has a beautiful downtown. It's kind of the new area for younger people to buy homes and to start thinking about raising a family. Because what was mentioned before as well is a lot of the older suburb cities are still taken over by those same, the boomer generation, you'd call it. And so there's not enough room for a lot of people my age if they're trying to buy a house or start a family. And so Brighton is kind of one of those places now that's rearing its head as the new yuppie suburban place. So he would go after school with his bow, and he would just sit for hours, he told me, just looking for deer, just waiting very patiently. And he loved it. He loved hunting. He did mention he didn't like the idea of guns. He never liked guns. I share this opinion with him. If you're going to kill an animal, you might as well have some respect and do it with a bow, right? Make it a little bit harder for yourself, and use the whole animal if possible, right? That's the whole thing. That's how I think about it. I'm glad that's how he thought about it. It was very refreshing to hear that, especially if you don't know Michigan, or I guess any Midwestern area that hunting is very large because of the wooded areas. Man, there's a lot of guns. There are a lot of guns. All right, so moving on. He then started talking about how much he loved wood shop. So this is where he built his first bow, was in wood shop. And to this day, the house where I was able to interview him, that's why he bought it with the third garage for the car, or whatever 3-car garage setup, is because part of that is just his workshop. And I got to see it, and it's just shelves and shelves of tools and different cuts of wood, and he's got all the crazy like saws and other power tool, like everything. It's wild. It looks like a lot of fun in there. So that's why he bought the 3rd-car garage. He keeps up with to this day. He is still a shop person. And he was telling me the whole first bow story was his teacher was making molds. This was in high school at Livonia Stevenson, which is still standing to this day. We'll get to him at Stevenson in a second. But his teacher was building molds, and that's what got him into making his own, was seeing how you can make molds and what comes out of the mold. And he made one that he remembers very well with a rosewood handle that was hand carved, he told me. That sounds beautiful. And it didn't snap until what he told me to be years later, simply because he told me that he just kept it drawn for a little too long. And wow, what strength he must have had to be able to keep it drawn long enough that it snaps. Shooting bows is fun. If you haven't shot a bow before, I would highly suggest shooting the different kinds of bows. So what he told me as a recurve bow, that's one that doesn't have that pulley system. It's just simply a string. With the wood is your typical, like, kind of looks like a boomerang a little bit. It's like curved, and you have just a piece of string, and you throw a bow in there and pull it back. So I encourage you to try that, and then go to the newer pulley system. I forgot what the name for it is. I'll include it in the notes. Kind of bow where you kind of get past a certain threshold, and then it just becomes very easy to keep it drawn. Go shoot a bow. It's very fun. Moving on, many years later, he told me that his son asked him to borrow $400 from him to buy a crossbow. So his son, who we'll talk about in a little bit, came to him, and he knew growing up his dad liked hunting, but he never took his son hunting. So JR, just for safety reasons and whatever, it was kind of a decision with his wife, never took his son out bow hunting when he was young. But then when his son was old enough, he came to him and he was like, "Hey, Dad, $400. I'm gonna buy a bow. You always got me interested when I was young. I wanna buy my own." And he was like, "Yeah, of course. Here's $400. No big deal. Pay it back. Thanks." So his son, turns out, he buys a bow, and he bought it for him. So one day, JR comes down the stairs, and there's just a bow sitting there, and and he talks to his son. He's like, what's going on? And his son was like, yo, this is my way of saying we're going hunting. Now you have a bow again. Let's go. Pretty cool for a son to do that. And I'm assuming they had a lot of fun. And I believe he still hunts to this day, his son. So super cool. He was in community college, so we'll jump back to that. And this is when he realized that summer school was both, one, cheaper, and two, shorter. And I had this experience as well. So what he ended up doing was he would only take summer classes, and he would have a day job or two during the week, simply because it was way easier to get things done and cheaper if you just went on the weekends at community college. Of course, you don't have that, in quotes, college experience, but I don't think he was searching for that. And after this interview, it does seem like he was always a very clever and business savvy guy. So, of course, once he realized that he could be making money at a regular job during the week and finishing up, still his major that he wanted to do on the weekend, why wouldn't he do that? I love to hear that people, even back then, were gaming the system. Even now, imagine how expensive school is. Even community colleges, geez, like, you need to game the system. And this is a great reminder of just don't go with the status quo, man. You got to figure out what's best for you and what's a way to save money, right? That's what we're all trying to do here. So he mostly did that, he said. And this is where he met a gal. But it's a funny story because the first time he met her in the class, she came in with 2 kids, and he automatically assumed that they were her daughters. So even though he liked her, he was like, I don't know if she's a dating option. She's got kids. Like, that's a lot to deal with. And so one day he was, he still wanted to make a move. So he went up to her and he was like, hey, where are your daughters today? Did you not bring them? Or like, is everything okay? And she was like, daughters? And that's when he realized that, of course, they weren't daughters. They were her sisters. They were just much younger. And what a win that must have been, because he's like, all right, well, she's back as an option. And so he asked her if she wanted to grab ice cream, and she was like, no, thanks. I'm on a diet. And he was like, oh, I'm crushed, like defeated. And then he was like, well, maybe we should just go for a drink instead. And she was like, absolutely, let's go for a drink. And that's how they met. They got married soon after that. And they had 3 kids together, one being the Bowman. Now, talking about the marriage, and I'm glad he was willing to talk to me about it, because they are divorced. But when they got married, they were young, and it did happen very quickly, which we also heard with Patty. When he reflects on it, he says it was too quick. It was too quick of a decision to do it and then start having kids as well. Although, of course, it's normal, and especially back then, it's kind of what you should be doing anyway. Now that he's been through all of it, it was too quick, and he should have been reflecting on, or at least, in my opinion, testing, right? If this person is the right person for him, do they get along? Why don't they get along in some ways if they don't? What are their goals? All that kind of stuff. And then you move on, right? Either way, you're going to sacrifice through a relationship, but you kind of got to know what you're getting into. And as always, I would like to mention, you probably shouldn't be making marriage decisions when you're still in that honeymoon phase of a relationship, where you still love everything about the person because you're blinded. So I was very impressed that he was willing to share that. And with his first child, this is the Bowman. It was very strong. He was telling me stories about how strong this kid was, just from a very young age. He was able to climb out of those giant, what do they call those things? You know, the things you keep your baby in when they're born, with the big, wall, like fencing. Sounds like a cage, but the crib. There we go. So, his first child, his little kid, was able to climb out of the crib, and he knows this because he caught him one day doing it. And so from then on, they put him in a little bed without, the crib walls, because they were like, if he's going to try to get off or out, like, he'll only fall a couple feet instead of falling, 5 feet or 6 feet from the top of that crib wall. Kind of a funny story. And he was also strong enough at a very young age to turn those safety knobs. Those little white, like, plastic things you put on top of a doorknob, and you got to press it in to be able to turn it? Yeah. No problem for this kid. Moving on to his brother, the person he grew up spending all this great time with. His brother was living in Ludington when he was married. Now, I loved to hear this because I had a little stint in Ludington when I was making a feature film in Michigan. I think this was a year and a half ago or so. I was able to live in Ludington for almost 4 months on my own in the off season. Ludington, if you don't know, is northwestern Michigan on the coast. Is it the coast? It's on the water. But it's a beautiful city. It's one of those cities that is mostly vacation homes, especially, oddly enough, people from Chicago. The state of Michigan, and the city of Ludington actually had this weird program back in, I believe it was the 60s. I'll do some research. They gave land away to people from Illinois, specifically just to draw them to the area. So you have a lot of these houses and the land in this beautiful town of Ludington, which is quite small, owned by people in Illinois. So you'll be going right in the summer, because I was also there, right, during the peak July, August season. There are majority Illinois plates in all of the houses, in the neighborhoods, in the bayous and stuff, which is really interesting. I never knew that. I was told in Ludington that was the case, and it's fascinating that that kind of stuff happened back then. So his brother was living in Ludington, operating a chiropractic service, or whatever you want to call it, office, and they went to him because specifically the doctors were telling his wife at the time that she couldn't have any more kids. So after the first kid, they were like, oh yeah, let's do another one. This was fun. I don't know who in the world says that, but they did. And the doctors were like, no, they ran all these tests. They're like, you are not going to be able to have a child. You shouldn't try. Either it won't be healthy for you, and it could be a big risk. And they went through all that kind of stuff. This is about a year or so of going through all these different kinds of tests, and in vitro as well, which is kind of wild. Didn't work out for them, which I'm sure is very expensive. So they go to the brother in Ludington, and obviously JR trusts his brother a ton. He's a chiropractor, though, which especially in that time, it was like considered dark magic. It still kind of is. It's not trusted. A lot of insurance still doesn't cover it because they're like, this isn't, proven science, all this kind of stuff. And so they finally went to the brother in Ludington, and they were like, hey, can you just check her out? Can you see what's going on? Maybe you can offer up some supplements that she might be able to do. And the story goes, the brother is looking at her and kind of adjusting her. And right away he was like, oh, her hips are way out of line. Let me adjust those. So they went to her kind of regularly, they went to him so she could have it, adjusted regularly to see the change happen. And sure enough, a year later, she was pregnant and had their second child. So with the second child, this was interesting as well to hear about. They did testing for autism early on, before the child was even born. And the doctors told them, hey, there's a high risk that this child is going to have autism. Do you want to keep it? That was an actual question. And while he was telling this story, he was still surprised. He was like, I didn't know that was an option, to not keep your child. Sure enough, of course he kept the child, and she turned out to be an Olympic athlete. So typical story, right? Where you never know who someone's going to turn out to be. So you might as well give him a damn chance. His brother, speaking more about the alternative medicine, his brother is what got him into alternative medicine. Obviously, being a chiropractor, his brother did a lot of studying on Eastern medicine and all the kind of different practices and stuff. And his brother was the one that actually solved his shoulder problems. So JR was having some pretty intense shoulder problems in both of his shoulders. He goes to his brother, and his brother gives him these beet pills. So just the vegetable, a beet. It's mostly just ground up beets in pill form, and you take them, and because at the time he was getting shots from his doctor to stop the pain, like cortisol or something or whatever it was. And after having these pills for a month or two, didn't have to take shots anymore, good to go. His shoulders to this day, they're fine. So pretty cool to hear that, right? I've always been interested in the whole chiropractic, alternative medicine kind of movement, the whole you don't need medication a lot of the time to fix things. And a lot of the time, if you do have problems like with your organs or with your skin or whatever, like a lot of weird problems, it could actually just be traced back to something weird like your hips are out of line, or change your diet, like you're ruining your gut, like stuff like that. It's really cool to hear that even back in those days when this was probably 20 years ago, maybe 30. It was one of those things where not a big deal. He kind of finished with his brother saying that he respected him very much, and he was always glad to have his big brother as a figure in his life. And it was one of those things where he was older, and he could tell that when he was young, he was kind of like, oh yeah, a little bit of an annoyance for his older brother, around his older friends and stuff. But his older brother was always very nice to him and accepting, and that's really cool to hear. Especially in the family dynamic of a lot of places, and especially in the USA. It's easy for us to be less emotionally attached to family, because for a lot of us, we're kind of taught that that's either weak or that's taboo, to have an intimate relationship with your brother or sister. And he did. And I'm really glad to hear that. So they both went to high school okay. Now, an interesting fact about him and his brother. They actually both went to high school with the father-in-law of one of the girls in the family. That was kind of a cool little story. It's like, your typical hashtag Michigan, local story is, I believe it's his, would it be niece? Okay, I'll walk you through it and you can decide. It is the daughter of his cousin. You tell me what that is. So anyways, her husband's dad, so, her father-in-law, was a really good friend of of JR and his brother in high school. And at Stevenson High School, go whatever their things are, still standing to this day. In Redford, this is kind of going back to that story of how him and his brother were always running around. In Redford, it was very segregated, obviously. It was a direct correlation with the white flight out of Detroit. One day, he was out playing with his brother, and the house across the street was up for sale. So it was being shown, and the parentals, whatever, the two people looking to buy it, were outside the house, and they saw JR and his brother playing in the front yard. And they asked the realtor if this was an integrated neighborhood, they called it, specifically because JR and his brother were so tan from being outside, these people thought they were African American. He knows this story because the realtor came over and told them how silly it was. He did mention, of course, it was different times back then, different things were accepted, and he's glad that now it doesn't matter what color you are. Of course, there's going to be, there's always going to be problems with human beings, but he's glad that it's not like it was before. But it was kind of funny that he was so tan, and that was a thing. So Stevenson in high school was the early 70s, just to give you an idea. What he did tell me is that he actually, in kind of like Art in his episode, how I was telling you that he loved to learn from older people. He was attracted to older people because of their knowledge. JR kind of had the same thing going on. In high school, he was a part of the student senate and also on the board that would help make policies for the school. So although he was a diver and he's a kid in high school, he was very interested in doing other kind of stuff like that. And he loved student senate, and especially being on that board because, he was a few kids among the adults that helped make the decisions for the schools. And he was able to just acquire so much knowledge from these older people on the board of Stevenson High School that really attracted him to, okay, yeah, like this is what you should be doing, is learning from your elders. Here we go again. This is the point of the project. You need to know what your elders think, what they went through, and this is how you learn from them. So he was doing it when he was young. That's incredible. The point of this project is exactly that, but just for the families of these people, you got to learn from your elders. You got to know what they went through, because no better way to know where you come from and to know what's inside of you and what you can bring out of yourself, tradition, et cetera, you got to do it. So this is why I called him a Renaissance man, is he was athletic. He did student senate, all that kind of stuff. And he would later be a salesman, you'll see, which is very interesting. I asked him about what it was like in the 70s. There were the freaks. There were the freaks, he said, and the geeks, which I'm so glad that I don't think he knows what the show is. If you don't know what the show is, go watch Freaks and Geeks. It's, of course, based on a Michigan high school. It's not shot in Michigan, but it's about Michigan. So, yes, there were the Freaks and Geeks, he said. The, in quotes, long hairs that smoked dope. That's a quote from him. And he recognized them, the long hairs, as people that didn't participate in gym class. This is how he kind of explained the different sects of the school. Is, you have the athletes, and then you have these people that just would rather just sit out and fail gym because they just don't want to participate. He found that interesting because, of course, he was an athlete, but he was also involved in other things in high school, and he just didn't. For me, I found it interesting because he was telling me he didn't understand why people would be like that. I don't know what to say about that, but those were the times where you were kind of making statements. And now I'm sure you can still do that, but I think there's more understanding. So, of course, you wouldn't fail gym now because you decided to not participate in it. Back then, you would just fail. So, in his high school yearbook, and this is someone that was on the board, he was very proud of this. It was an older person who saw a lot of potential in JR. And in his high school yearbook, this man wrote, "To JR, a doer, not a talker." And he remembers that a lot because it was very encouraging to him then. And it was obviously reinforcing to him. And it still encourages him to this day to follow through with stuff, because the way he explains it is so many people are what he calls the 90%ers, the people that just won't finish something. They'll get right up to the end and they'll find a reason to just either give up or forget about it or move on. And I would have to agree, this happens to a lot of people. It's very hard to push through to the end and see something through. He called it a curse, and he is glad that he learned not to be that way, and he was encouraged for not being that way from a very young age, because he's still, to this day, lives his life that way. He actually went into engineering after high school. I was asking him, you're in this community college and you're working these jobs. What are you trying to do? He wanted to be an engineer because he loved it. And he was actually really good at drafting, something that you don't do anymore nowadays because everything is automated. It's AutoCAD, they call it. All the students, though, in his class would argue from what he said just for the sake of arguing. And one day he's talking to his teacher, and his teacher is like, how are you enjoying the class? And like, what's the future like for you? What's the goal? And he was like, I'd love to be an engineer, but all these, everyone just bickers around here. Like, what's the deal? Like, they don't get anything done. And his teacher was like, well, you better be ready because that's every day of the week at work where I work as an engineer. And so when JR heard that, quite literally the next day he switched to business. He just didn't want to deal with it. Can't say if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but hey, took some advice. I can identify with this specifically because I have a very specific memory. I was at a certain high school. It was my freshman year, and it was the first semester of my sophomore year. And I go up to a teacher that I had for biology, who was also the baseball coach, someone I very much respected, someone I knew before high school. Because those are the days where it's like, if you're good at a sport, then you pretty much figure out where you want to go for high school to play for their program. So I knew this guy before I even went to this high school. And so, a year and a half of school, I go to this guy and I'm like, hey man, I didn't tell him I didn't like this school and I didn't want to be there anymore, but I just asked him, I said, hey, I know you went here. What was it like when you were here? Did you like going here? And he straight up told me, I hated it. I was forced to go here and I wanted to leave every second I was here. And so I left the next day. so I did the same thing. I mean, I took this guy's advice. I did find it kind of funny that he was, one, a teacher and a coach at the school. So it did sound like he, after all that time, appreciated it for what it was. But yeah, I was living in the moment. I got out of there. So good on JR as well for, taking advice from people and just rolling with the punches. Kind of like Rich as well in his episode, a guy that ended up doing something he never thought he would do. So, okay, we need to go back to high school because this is the part of my notes. He was kind of jumping around as always, everyone does. In high school, he, at Livonia Stevenson, he was also, this is Renaissance Man, he was also the mascot. And I don't know what they are. I'll put it in the notes, whatever their mascot is. He was also the mascot for all the games. And I asked him why. And his response, in quotes, how else would you get to know the cheerleaders? So you've got an athlete, you've got this, this funny guy, this performer who's chasing after girls as always, and a student Senate educated, clever kid looking to make some change and learn from older people. Interesting mix, right? For high school, especially when you should be finding yourself. He's doing all these things that aren't just to help him find himself. It seemingly was him doing a lot of stuff to help others around him, which is kind of cool. Another way that he was a Renaissance man, and this is a great example in a very funny correlation of the #Michigan movement. He ended up winning what they would call the all-around school award or whatever it was. It is basically, the most well-rounded kid that got voted for that. He won that. And while he was getting, during the award ceremony, the person that won the debate award was this woman named Diane, who, sure enough, that was the gal that he thought had daughters and he ended up marrying. So he didn't know her at that time. And she was kind of just, passing through his life kind of thing. That was Diane. And what an interesting occurrence. So while he was in the community college, doing the school on the weekends, stuff like that, he sold shoes. Now, at that time, you would get commission. So he worked super hard to get sales because he would make a ton of money on commission. Now, as a savvy businessman, he came to realize very quickly that shoe polish was where the money was for commission. Not selling shoes, but it was actually the polish that got you more commission. So what he would do is put the brushes, because you would sell these separately. So you'd sell shoe polish, you'd sell the brushes. The brushes were cheap. The polish was a little bit more, of course. You'd sell them, and he noticed that not a lot of people were buying the brushes. They were just buying the polish. So what he did was, instead of trying to convince people to buy them separately, he rubber banded them together, and he made them the same exact prices they would be separate, but he marketed it as a deal, the 2-for-1 kind of deal. Sure enough, he sold so much of those that he won whatever. He was basically the best salesman I don't know if it was the country. I assumed it was the state. I think it was more of a local shoe place, but he was the highest ranked salesman because of thinking of things like that. He also realized that, and this is really cool to hear, he realized that companies made purses that matched the shoes that they were selling in that store. But what they would do is they would ship them separately, and he couldn't figure out why they wouldn't just ship them as a package. So, of course, as these women were trying on shoes, he would go get the purse that matched those shoes, and he would put it on their shoulder, and he would go, wow, this purse goes really well with those shoes. You look great. And the women would always be like, yeah, oh my gosh, I'll take them both. And so the ultimate business savvy man JR was. Going back to high school, I want to talk more about him being a diver. So the funny thing about Livonia Stevenson was they didn't have a diving coach. A lot of schools do. Most do. I think especially nowadays. At that time, because of the money in the program, they only had a swimming coach. And he had no idea how to teach people how to dive. So he'd be teaching the people how to swim. And all they had, he told me, was diagrams to figure out how to do different, twists and turns and different diving techniques. As you can imagine, the team was not very good. They never won anything. They kind of just had fun. Naturally, he'd get hurt very often. I asked him about this. He said, sometimes you wish you didn't do it. But it's one of those things where you're having fun. Yeah, you're going to slap yourself different ways if you don't make the move the right way. But at the end of the day, it's just a little rash, and it stings for a little bit, and you're good to go. He did say, though, there was this one guy who was trying to do, some of the more intense, intricate tricks where you would, you'd get more points, of course, if when you were doing these twists and turns or flips or whatever, how close you were to the diving board. You'd get more points for being closer to the diving board. This one guy one day was trying to do one of those moves where, your head would end up really close. And, sure enough, his teeth were right in the board and cracked his teeth right out. And he remembers they all dove in, going to the bottom of the pool, trying to find those teeth for this guy. Didn't say they found him, but they looked. He said after that, he didn't do many hard diving moves. So he's remembering all of this stuff, high school through into college and being able to work, a day job and go to school on the weekends and still make good money. And he also lived at home. And this is a time, of course, it was a little more accepted because you're going to a local community college or a local college. So you can be at home with your parents. And he said he would come home after work or school, whatever, and his mother would have food on the table and she would do his laundry. And he remembers this, and I quote, he says, I had the world by the ass and I didn't even know it. Because he was rent-free as long as he was in school. That was the deal he had with his parents. There was always food on the table, like I said. He was able to put his car in the garage. That's huge. Especially back in those days, when the cars were cool, you know what I'm saying? And you cared about your car. What a deal he had. And he was kind of reflecting on it. He said, man, wouldn't that be nice now to have? Talking about kind of what life was later on for him. He did have 3 kids. And I kind of asked him, what was it like either raising kids or, being in that situation of having kids? And he said, which I really found intriguing was, and this is a quote, you feel what they go through. As the kids grow up, whatever they're dealing with, the hurt and the happiness, you feel all of that directly. And I've never really thought about, one, my parents specifically this way, or two, just parenting in general. Of course, I know it's a give and take, and it can be hard, and you're trying to instill certain stuff in them. But I never really realized, especially as I got older, I was like, oh, whatever. They're just hanging out. They're my parents. Like they're being nice and providing for me. I didn't realize that, of course, as a mother, as a father, this is your offspring, and this is your DNA. You want to see this person have the best life possible. That's all you want for a child. And as they're going through stuff that that they went through as well, their parents dealt with this. Now they're dealing with it. I'm sure they didn't think of this for their parents. As parents now, they're truly feeling the hurt and the ups and downs of their child, no matter what age they are. And that's something that I think is noteworthy. It doesn't matter if you're 40 years old and now you have kids and you have the good job, and still, whatever you're going through, if your parents are around, they're living that with you. And that's that gut feeling that parents have for their children. And I think we kind of forget about that a lot. I think there's almost like an age limit, right? Where it's like, oh, once they're 13 or 14, then everything's fine. They're just going to go through typical stuff, and being a parent is like not as heavy, I guess is the word. But he's saying you will always feel what your children are going through. And he was talking about this also because one of his children did go through a divorce. And so he felt that because, of course, he went through a divorce, JR as well. And he hated to see it happen to his son. So I kind of asked him a little more about that. And I was glad to hear that, yeah, he was able to kind of help his son through, yeah, I've been there. This is kind of what it's like. And I feel for you. And I'm here. Like, divorce is tough. And just let me know what I can do. And it was cool to hear that he kind of helped his son financially and with all the legal stuff, because he does have a lot of friends that are lawyers and stuff in his line of work. Yeah, it was very impressive to see that it wasn't one of those like, oh, you're older now, figure it out. Like this is you learning. It was more of, hey, I've been there. I want to help make it easier for you. And that kind of brings us right into the lessons, the part of the interview where I'm like, after all of this, of course, what do you want to pass on to someone in your family that could be hearing this? And he said that years ago, and this is a story he started to tell right after I asked him this. He said years ago, he rented a space for his company, and it was connected to this kind of organization that allowed people to come in that were either alcoholics and depressed, or just depressed for other reasons. But it was basically a kind of a depression room, a space where people that were dealing with depression could come in. You could play games and you can talk to each other, and they'd have meetings and stuff. And so his building was connected to it was in the same building. What they were going to do was build a wall in between them to separate them, from the business. So it wouldn't be weird, or, people wouldn't come around. But he decided against it. And all they did was put up kind of like a rope saying like, oh, now this is blah, blah, blah offices. So unless you're here for that, please don't, come across. And either way, the people that were over on that side would always venture over to his office. And he kind of got talking to them. What he learned from these people that he would talk to is, who were, of course, suffering from depression. Everybody perceives things differently. Everybody perceives things differently. This is when he came up with what he calls the hangnail theory. Everyone deals with a hangnail, once in their life, maybe more, bless you if you deal with it on a regular basis. What he was saying, though, was everyone deals with that hangnail differently. It can hurt and you can ignore it, or you find a way to get rid of it, or it's there and it completely ruins your day, or it's always bothering you. It takes you out of things, and it can just destroy you in terms of like mentally, the capacity you have for ignoring it. It can just it can just destroy everything around you, right? That's the hangnail theory. Everyone reacts to things differently. There's obstacles that will break people or obstacles that can break records. That's how he put it. And everyone's different. There's no need to judge for being one way or the other. That's what these people helped him realize, and that is such a beautiful lesson to have. It's all about how you perceive it. What a really cool way to live life. Things might be going well, things might be going badly for you. Either way, you get to decide how you want to perceive every single moment in your life, and you can make it a positive thing, a negative thing, whatever you want. It's up to you. So I got to thank JR for being so personal. Another person being so open about things like divorce and struggles in his family and racism from a different era. It is very refreshing to hear people be open and accepting of just how things are and how they were and how they want to be in the future. Thanks for listening.